There's a hill in Washington, D.C. where the city quiets itself. A ridge of breezes, old trees, and Gothic spires, almost too peaceful for a place built from war and worry. This is the Armed Forces Retirement Home, better known in the old days as the Soldiers' Home. A sanctuary for aging and injured soldiers, and if the whispers are true, a sanctuary for a few who never made it out of uniform. A few weeks ago, we stepped inside President Lincoln's cottage, the summer refuge where he drafted ideas that would reshape the American soul. Today, we shift just a few steps down the hill to the institution that made that refuge possible. And next week, we'll follow the final thread of this arc all the way to the nation's first military cemetery, the one Lincoln saw from his window each morning, long before Arlington claimed that honor. But first, let's talk about the war bill that paid for paradise. Everyone loves a good nation honors its veterans story. But what if I told you this one started with a general threatening an entire city and collecting a ransom to keep his soldiers from burning it down? And what if the peaceful pastoral haven built from that ransom is now considered one of America's most haunted military sites? Because as some folks will tell you, some soldiers check in for peace. Others never check out. To find the beginning of this story, you have to leave D.C. entirely and drop into the chaos of Mexico City, 1847. General Winfield Scott, better known as Old Fuss and Feathers, just marched U.S. troops straight into the capital. Normally, this is where victorious armies go absolutely feral. Looting, destruction, the whole grim buffet. Scott wasn't having it. Instead of letting his troops ransack the city, he slapped Mexico City's wealthy elite with a $150,000 contribution, a protection fee, a don't make us break stuff fee. A war is expensive and so are soldiers fee. Some of that money went to supplies, but nearly $119,000 remained, worth millions today. Scott, who believed deeply in caring for soldiers after the fighting stopped, parked that money in a New York bank and labeled it simply, Fund for Army Asylum. He then pestered Congress until 1851, when they finally used that fund to buy a 197-acre country estate from banker George Washington Riggs. And just like that, through war, money, and one very persistent general, the first retirement home for American soldiers was born. When the government purchased Riggs' estate, they got a gem. The third highest point in Washington, a place where breezes actually existed and mosquitoes didn't run the show. Riggs had already built a Gothic revival cottage that became the heart of the new U.S. soldiers' home. This wasn't some pity project. It was a well-designed community with a purpose. Veterans farmed cattle and crops on a sprawling 300-acre dairy operation. They produced much of their own food. They lived with dignity, with medical care, with camaraderie, and with the earliest recognition of what we'd now call PTSD. The grounds became famous, but not accessible. Even back then, this was not a place you could just wander into. A fact the gate guard reminded me of very firmly. Cottage only, nowhere else, federal crime, blah, blah, blah. Respectfully, sir, I wore the uniform too. Surely that earns me a peek at the porch? But no. Retired soldiers still live here, and privacy is its own kind of peace. A few presidents took notice of this breezy hill. James Buchanan used the grounds as a summer hideaway. Then came Abraham Lincoln. From 1862 to 1864, the Lincoln family spent nearly a quarter of each presidency living right here in Riggs Cottage. They came not just for the cooler air, but for something deeper. After the death of their 11-year-old son, Willie, the White House felt like a tomb. Mary Todd Lincoln described it exactly that way. So the soldiers' home became their refuge, a pocket of quiet carved out from the storm. Here, Lincoln began shaping the Emancipation Proclamation. Here, he rode daily to the White House on dusty, dangerous road. And from here, every morning and every night, he could see the nation's first military cemetery. He heard taps drift through the dusk long before the rest of the nation embraced the sound. If you're enjoying this covert arc tracing Lincoln's refuge, the soldiers' home, and the earliest national cemetery, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the final chapter next week. We hunt down the forgotten corners of American history, one roadside stop, one ghost story, one federal "please don't trespass" warning at a time. The Lincolns' last night here was April 13th, 1865. The next evening at Ford's Theater, everything changed. Mary later wrote, "How dearly I loved the soldiers' home. It had been a place of healing for them, just as it was for the hundreds of broken, exhausted veterans who lived here. But a place saturated with grief rarely stays quiet. A home for men haunted by war. A grieving first family wrestling with unbearable loss. A cemetery full of the honored dead right next door. If hauntings are born from sorrow, this place had more than enough to spare." Through the decades, residents and staff have reported the usual old building blues: footsteps in empty corridors, cold pockets where there shouldn't be any, the unmistakable sense that someone stands behind you, even when they don't. But the legends get more specific. Folklore claims Mary Todd Lincoln, desperate to speak with her lost children, held seances inside the cottage. Whether she ever reached anyone on the other side is unknown, but some believe she cracked open a door that never quite shut. And then there's the big one, the celebrity ghost sighting. For over a century, people have spoken of a tall man in a top hat, standing by the road on fog-heavy nights, sad-faced, silent, watching. Abraham Lincoln's ghost, they say. And according to local lore, he's sometimes joined by the spirit of poet Walt Whitman, who lived nearby and often saw Lincoln ride past during the war. The two men exchange a quiet bow and dissolve back into the mist. The story became so iconic that in 2012, the National Trust for Historic Preservation allowed the first official paranormal investigation of the cottage. So what is this place, really? A landmark built with a wartime ransom? A sanctuary that offered dignity to generations of American soldiers? A refuge where a president tried to hold the Union together? A haunted crossroad where the weight of grief lingers in the air? Maybe it's all of those at once. But one thing is certain. The soldiers' home began as an answer to war and became a resting place for warriors of every kind. Tell me in the comments, do you think historic military sites carry echoes of the men and women who served there? And if you've got a site you want me to investigate next, drop it in the thread. I'm always listening.